People said that cocaine killed John Belushi in 1982. But Jim, his brother, knows something that no one else does. Now that he's 70, he's telling the shocking truth about John's football injuries, the brain disease that no one could identify, and the Hollywood cover-up that still bothers him. What really happened to the craziest star on SNL? John Belushi was born on January 24th, 1949 in Chicago, Illinois. His folks came to the United States from Albania and worked hard to make a life for themselves. Adam, his father, came to the United States when he was 12 years old. Before he opened his own business, he worked long hours in restaurants. He had an Albanian mother named Agnes who was born in Ohio. She worked as a drugstore assistant for a while before putting her career on hold to raise her family. They taught their children the importance of following rules and not giving up. There were 3 kids in John's family: Marion, Jim, and Billy. Their house was strict, but they loved each other very much. Even when things were bad, there was always laughter. John was funny just by nature. He loved making people laugh, and his parents supported him even though they didn't fully understand how good he was at it. John wasn't just the funkiest kid, though. He was eager to beat everyone and stand out. John found new ways to shine after moving to Wheaton, Illinois, with his family. He became co-captain of the football team at Wheaton Central High School. Because he played so aggressively, people called him that. But what he really loved was performing. He joined the school's theater group and stood out right away. Dan Payne, his acting teacher, thought he was great. In 1967, for the summer, he helped John get a job at a paid theater. Everything changed after that. John then understood that acting wasn't just a hobby. He planned to do that for the rest of his life. He was also very artistic when he was making music. He and some friends started a band in high school called the Ravens. At the stage, he brought the same crazy energy that he brought to football and theater. He played the drums and sang. The band made a song called Listen to Me Now, Jolly Green Giant in 1965. John got his first taste of fame with it, but it didn't become a hit. No matter where he was, he felt at ease performing in front of people. John had to make a choice after high school. He thought about going to Western Illinois University to play football, but he decided not to. He went to the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater for a year and then switched schools to the College of DuPage. He helped start a theater group called the West Compass Players there. They played in small places like coffee shops and church halls. It wasn't very crowded, but the shows were really exciting. John was getting better at his style and learning how to take charge of a room just by being there. He made a big move in February 1971 when he was only 22 years old. He tried out for the famous Second City Improv Theater in Chicago. He didn't have any official training. His raw energy, on the other hand, was hard to overlook. He was loud, unexpected, and not afraid of anything. The directors liked what they saw and put him in the group. That made him one of the youngest acts at the Second City. Each week, he made only $150. It wasn't about the money. Being around some of the funniest people in the country made him feel right at home. John Belushi did more than just work at the Second City when he was young. He learned how to dress and met people who would have an impact on his whole career there. Harold Ramos and Brian Doyle Murray were 2 of them. Both would go on to make their own names in the world of comedy. Ramos was a great writer. He later made Ghostbusters and Caddyshack, but back then he was just another comic trying to make it. He became good friends with Belushi. They're always sketching and talking about their plans. Ramos pushed Belushi to play different roles, which helped him improve his timing and performance. Brian Doyle Murray was next. He was Bill Murray's older brother. He had a dry, smart sense of humor that went well with Belushi's wild, loud energy. It was impossible for Belushi, Ramos, and Doyle Murray to lose as a team. They were hungry, young, and set on changing the way humor was done. But the Second City was just the start. Belushi got a part in National Lampoon's Lemmings, an off-Broadway show that made fun of the Woodstock Music Festival in 1972. When it first started at the Village Gate in New York, the show was a big hit right away. It was crazy, loud, and happened very quickly. Chevy Chase and Christopher Guest were just 2 of the many up-and-coming stars in the group. Belushi was a good fit. When he played King Herod in a spoof of Jesus Christ Superstar, it was one of his best performances. The play, which was called Jackie Christ Superstar, made people laugh and cry at the same time. The show had a lot of excitement that spread. The actors got energy from the crowd. Even more, Belushi showed every night that he was a unique artist. Lemmings was performed 350 times and got great reviews. Time magazine said it was a hilarious parody of the rock scene and its alternative heroes. There was more to it than just comedy. It was a place to start. There was more for Belushi to take away from Lemmings than just experience. He was moving. In the business world, people began to pay attention. Lorne Michaels was one of them. He was a director looking for people to be on a new late-night comedy show. But Belushi took another step in his career before he joined Saturday Night Live. In 1973 and 1974, he was on the National Lampoon Radio Hour, a silly radio show. Radio was a different kind of trouble. Nobody to feed off of, and there was no stage to move around on. His voice had to say everything. He had to work on his delivery and the flow of his jokes because of it. The show also put him in touch with more coming stars. Chevy Chase, Gilda Radner, and Bill Murray were all in the movie. They worked together to make fast-paced, rude comedy that set the tone for what SNL would become. It wasn't easy for John Belushi to get to Saturday Night Live. Chevy Chase and Michael O'Donoghue tried to get him to join the show in 1975. At first, though, Lorne Michaels wasn't sure. He thought that Belushi's style, which was crazy, unexpected, and very physical, might not fit with what he had in mind for SNL. But then there was the test. Belushi walked in and did what he did best, which was to leave Michaels with no choice. To be on the show, along with Chevy Chase, Dan Aykroyd, Gilda Radner, and Jane Curtin, John Belushi joined the first group. Bill Murray was also meant to be there, but he had to wait because money was tight. On October 11th, 1975, the first episode aired. Just a few minutes into the show, Belushi was the second person to appear on screen in the first sketch, The Wolverines. He was making a difference, but it had been hard to get there. NBC wanted cast members to sign deals that paid them only $750 per show for 5 years. The deal made Belushi angry, so he wouldn't sign it. He was about to leave before the show even began. He finally agreed when Bernie Brillstein, who would soon be his boss, stepped in. He signed the paperwork right before the show started. The first season of Saturday Night Live was a mess. People didn't finish the set until hours before the show started, and no one was sure if it would make it. But Belushi did very well in the chaos. His energy was powerful, and you couldn't avoid being around him. He was physically funny in a way that not many others could match. His natural talent and his friendship with Dan Aykroyd helped shape the direction of Saturday Night Live. Some of the most famous parts of the show would happen because of this, like when the Blues Brothers were born. But that was only the start. It wasn't just Belushi's energy that changed SNL. It was about the figures he made, which became huge hits right away. Samurai Futaba was one of the most important ones. A sword-wielding samurai who is thrown into modern jobs and is always serious and honorable, and always funny in some way. The idea came from Toshiro Mifune's parts in Akira Kurosawa flicks. It didn't matter that Belushi couldn't talk real Japanese. He put so much into his act that it worked. The sketches were always on, especially when Buck Henry was the speaker. No matter if it was a samurai restaurant, a samurai tailor, or a samurai eye doctor, they all took the same idea and made it better. The Olympia Cafe also had a cheeseburger sketch. It was a simple Greek cafe with only cheeseburgers, Pepsi, and chips on the menu. People asked for different things, but Belushi, as the master, wouldn't give them to them. It became one of SNL's most famous bits because of the fast-paced delivery, the over-the-top accent, and the crazy energy. It's still used today. However, Belushi wasn't just about loud figures and silly moves. He was very good at making impressions. It was hard to tell who he was when he sang Feeling Alright on Saturday Night Live until the real Joe Cocker came out and joined him. It was a legendary show. It was just as clear that he was Henry Kissinger, using a heavy accent to make the former Secretary of State look like a silly character. Beethoven, Captain Kirk, and even Marlon Brando were all people he fought. He gave it his all every time, making each image feel like a new person. Belushi was different because he was so strict. He put everything he had into everything he did, whether it was a pratfall or a sharp political comedy. That energy spread easily, and it helped make SNL what it was in its early years. He set the bar for the rest of the group and showed that SNL wasn't just about writing, it was also about presence, performance, and not being afraid. But behind the scenes, things are getting worse. SNL was live, hard to plan for, and tiring. As Belushi rose to fame, people had high hopes for him. There should be more sketches, concerts, and shows. He used drugs to stay ahead. It started out as a way to get through the late nights, but it quickly turned into more. His drug use got worse. At the time, it was almost part of the society, but people did notice. No one was slowing down, even though everyone was tired. His work never stopped, even as his problems got worse. Every week, he brought it. The crowd never saw how tired, stressed, or fought they were. The shows that made SNL history were just shown to them. Behind closed doors, though, Belushi was in a fight he couldn't win. We will never forget how quickly and crazy John Belushi rose to fame in Hollywood. An American Lampoon's Animal House gave him his big break. In 1978, that changed the rules. The movie only cost $2.3 million to make, but made over $141 million, which shocked everyone. It made the third most money of any movie that year after Superman and Grease. That much money was made by an R-rated comedy? No one thought so, but Animal House wasn't just a movie. It was a culture event. Belushi played Bluto Blutarsky, who loved parties and caused trouble. He owned the part, not just played it. His physical entertainment was out of this world. It didn't bother him when he smashed a guitar to pieces in one scene. In another, he was in charge of a crazy toga party that became one of the most famous comedic moments of all time. Some of the best parts of the movie weren't even in the script. He ran across some wet grass, slipped, and fell to the ground. He didn't stop, but instead made it a great comic moment. That was John Belushi. He made chaos look like it was easy for him. The movie was a hit in more ways than one. All over the country, college students started toga parties to try to get into the movie's wild spirit. Blaster became a star right away. Even though he only got paid $40,000 for the part, Belushi's act made him star. Bigger things were going to happen now that Hollywood knew what he could do. The Blues Brothers was his next movie. It was based on a simple Saturday Night Live sketch and became a big hit. He and Dan Aykroyd played brothers Jake and Elwood Blues, who were on a mission to save the youth home where they grew up. To get their old blues band back together, great artists like James Brown, Aretha Franklin, and Ray Charles performed, and there was a lot of comedy, music, and action. From the beginning to the end, making the Blues Brothers was a mess. The first draft that Aykroyd wrote was a mess. It was over 300 pages long and hard to read. This movie had to be cut down by director John Landis before the movie could even start. What made things hard, though, was Belushi. He was using drugs more and more. People on board didn't know where he was for hours or even days at a time. At one point, they set up a radio system just to find him. But he did a great job when he was on set. It was Aykroyd who introduced him to blues music, which he loved very much. He gave the part his all. Even though there were problems, the movie was a hit and made over $115 million around the world. There was more to it than meets the eye. One of the most unique films of its time, it was a love letter to blues music. Belushi still had more to do. He played the lead role in Steven Spielberg's high-budget World War II comedy 1941, which came out in 1979. It had a group of stars. There are big hopes for this huge production. It didn't work, though. The critics were split. It made money, but not as much as Animal House or the Blues Brothers. He tried something completely different in 1981. In the romance comedy Continental Divide, he played a tough reporter from Chicago who falls in love with a quiet scientist who lives in the mountains. The part was softer and more serious, and critics liked how he played it. People didn't connect with it as much, though. A lot of people still thought of him as the crazy, unpredictable comedian and not as the romantic star. His drug use was getting worse behind the scenes. He was already using cocaine a lot during Animal House. He filmed some of his funniest scenes while he was high. It got worse on the Blues Brothers, which caused delays and sent production costs through the roof. Belushi kept going even though people around him were scared. Judith Jacqueline and John Belushi got married on New Year's Eve 1976. They had been going out since high school. She wasn't just his wife. She was his partner, his biggest fan, and an important part of his work. She helped form the Blues Brothers and was there for him as his fame grew. But his drug use got worse as his fame grew. He started to use cocaine every day, and their marriage began to fall apart because of it. Judy helped him in every way she could. That man who made people laugh and dealt with his own problems was what she saw behind the crazy acts. She stuck with him through good times and bad, but addiction doesn't wait for love. It took over and pushed him farther away from the life they had made together. His mood swings and long absences made her feel like she couldn't do anything. She fought for him all the way, but his addiction was too strong for her. As soon as he died, she set out to protect his memory. She wanted people to remember how good he was. It's not just his problems. She wrote Samurai Widow in 1990, which showed a side of Belushi that most people never saw. In his honor, she worked on projects that kept his spirit alive. She made her own life over the years. She got married again and changed her name to Judith Jacqueline Belushi Pisano, but she always thought about the man she loved. She died in July 2024 after a long fight with cancer. Besides John Belushi, she made sure that everyone would always remember who he really was. For all of his energy and confidence on screen, Belushi had a lot of problems with feeling good about himself. They didn't go away when they did well. It probably made things worse. He became famous after appearing on Saturday Night Live, and the Blues Brothers showed that he could do even more. But with each new success came more stress. There was a part of him that was afraid he wasn't funny, big, or good enough. It was tough to be funny, and he felt it every day. Chevy Chase had already left Saturday Night Live for Hollywood, and Belushi hated feeling like he was behind. He put himself through more and harder work, and used drugs to keep going. There was more to it than just parties. He had to stay smart, stay ahead, and fight the fear that he wouldn't be at the top for long. There was cocaine all over Hollywood. Not only was it possible, it was also common. It was used at parties, on movie sets, and even behind the scenes at Saturday Night Live. For someone like Belushi, who was already having a hard time to get away, he tried to stop. There were times when he tried to be in charge. In 1981, while filming Continental Divide, he made one of his best tries to stay sober. This show was unique. It was a love comedy, and he could show that he could do more than just make people laugh out loud. The man who watched over him, Smokey Wendell, kept drugs away from him. He stayed clean for a while. He paid attention to his work. He showed himself that he could do well without drugs. He then worked with Dan Aykroyd on Neighbors, his next movie. Right from the start, it was a mess. He was angry about how the movie was being made, which made him go back to old habits. He began using again. The mood changes came back. He wouldn't leave his caravan until director John let him. When he got really angry, he trashed the office of Columbia's musical director one night. He no longer had the power he had during Continental Divide. On February 28, 1982, John Belushi got to Los Angeles. He was supposed to work on a movie script and meet with Hollywood directors, but things quickly went wrong. He partied and used drugs a lot instead of focusing on his work. He went to the Chateau Marmont and checked into room number 3. The Chateau Marmont is a famous hotel for its privacy and famous guests. It turned into his safe haven, a spot where he could hide from the world. He went from club to club on the Sunset Strip every night. He often went to the Roxy, the Rainbow Bar and Grill, and Dan Tannis. He wasn't just there to hang out and drink. His goal was to get away. He made the most of the fact that cocaine was easy to find. A lounge above the Roxy where famous people could party in secret was one of his favorite spots. It was called On the Rocks. Belushi liked being around other people but wanted to hide his problems. This was the right place for him. Every day, he looked worse. His face was swollen, and he could barely move. He wasn't paying attention when his wife Judy called from New York to worry about him. People even knew he was worried about them. Robert De Niro and Harry Dean Stanton came to see him on March 4th. The place was a mess. There were clothes on the floor, food out, and a general feeling of chaos. They tried to get him out of whatever bad mood he was in by inviting him to dinner at Dan Tannis. But he said no. He stayed behind with Kathy Smith, a woman who had used drug before. She gave him heroin and cocaine shots that night. Bill Wallace, his trainer and security, came to the bungalow the next morning to deliver a typewriter and a tape recorder. He saw Belushi lying in bed and not moving. He tried to get him awake. Nothing. He tried to do CPR, but it was too late. John Belushi passed away at the age of 33. The autopsy proved what many people already thought. He had too much heroin and coke in his body. After years of heavy drug use, his head was swollen and his lungs were full of fluid. His body was in bad shape. It wasn't a mistake that he died. It was the last step in a long series of bad things that had been happening. The Chateau Marmont was once a quiet place for famous people to relax, but all of a sudden, it became the center of a media storm. Inside, a lot of reporters crowded. Streets were lined with film teams. The hotel had hosted many important people, but now it would always be associated with Belushi's overdose. The investigation quickly turned its attention to Kathy Smith, the woman he had been with that night. He had been getting drugs from her for days, and witnesses said they saw her shoot him more than once. She ran away to Canada after Belushi's death, but she couldn't get away from what had happened. In the end, she told the truth. She was the one who gave him the poison that killed him. She was charged with murder in the second degree and drug crimes. The case was all over the news, and the stories kept coming back. She finally agreed to a plea deal, staying away from the worst charges. She got 3 years in jail, but she only had to serve 15 months before she was let out. The judge made it clear that Belushi had chosen to die, but Smith's act had caused his death. Jim Belushi thinks that his brother John may have had chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, because of injuries he got while playing football in high school. This is not a fact, but the idea makes sense based on what we know about head injuries now. Brain damage from repeated blows to the head is called CTE. It can make you forget things, have mood swings, feel depressed, or even get dementia. It was thought for a long time that concussions were the most dangerous injury. But new study shows that it doesn't matter how many times someone's head gets hit. It matters how many times it gets hit. How bad this problem is has been shown by studies of past football players. Some 631 brains from former athletes were used in a study. Almost half of them had advanced CTE, and another 26% had early signs. A lot of these players never had a concussion officially identified. This shows that even small impacts that happen over and over again can cause long-lasting damage. For John Belushi, this thought brings up a scary possibility. His jokes were funny and full of energy. He threw himself off of tables and did crazy stunts for his shows. He had no idea if he had CTE. Not a single person did. Back then, people didn't know much about the sickness, and there's no way to be sure without looking inside his head. But if Jim is right, it could mean that John had more problems than just being addicted, and how success can be hard. Jim also thinks that John used drugs to deal with worry and pain. It was always there after Saturday Night Live made him famous. He always had to be funny. The look had to stay the same. The way of life was tiring. In Hollywood, cocaine was everywhere, and John used it to get through the day. It wasn't just him. A lot of artists and musicians in that time used drugs to stay alive. But for John, it became something he could not handle. Jim has said that Hollywood made things worse. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, it wasn't okay to use drugs. It was how people lived. The business didn't care about the problem, and in some cases, it made it worse. It was okay for some producers and directors to do nothing. Some gave drugs to actors to keep them busy. It was almost impossible to quit in that setting. The story of John Belushi breaks my heart. He was a great comedian, but he died when he was only 33 years old. Hollywood is not the same now. More people know about addiction and mental health issues, and those who are suffering can get more help. But back then, John, other people like him had to fight their own wars. John left behind a strong foundation. He was given a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame after his death on May 4th, 2004. We can still see how he changed Saturday Night Live and comedy in general. Even though he died too soon, his impact never went away.